Hey guys, we're live. We have a lot to talk about today, including a article that Ed and I just published related to the Trump Tower meeting, the Trump Tower Moscow plans, as well as the Rosneft deal that has been talked about in the past and has been talked about in the Steele dossier. We also want to touch on Time Person of the Year. It's an interesting pick, one that's unprecedented, I'd say. We want to talk about Michael Cohen's sentencing, which is scheduled to take place tomorrow, and what else?
I'm really going to focus on the Rosneft oil deal and its link to the closure of the Trump Tower Moscow deal.
Yeah, if you guys followed our tweets this morning, we both tweeted about an article we published this morning, and it's quite detailed. It goes into the kind of the overlap between the Trump Tower Moscow deal and the Rosneft deal that's talked about in the dossier. So let's start off with that, and you guys can ask any questions as we go along.
Yeah, so as we all know, Michael Cohen last week, it was shown in court documents that he had lied about the Trump Tower Moscow deal, which he originally said when he testified in front of Congress that talks with Russia for this deal had ended in January of 2016. It turns out that that was a lie, and Cohen was actually still in discussions with Felix Sater and Russia to build a Trump Tower in Moscow all the way until June of 2016. Then it abruptly ended. Cohen basically stopped talking about the deal. He told Sater they were no longer working on the deal. And people wondered why. It's unknown. It's still unknown why that deal ended. But we can speculate that it was because much of the media had gained information and began scrutinizing Trump's connections to Felix Sater, who was basically a mafia member and part of organized crime, and also the deal with Russia as Trump was pushing this idea of lifting sanctions against Russia and being friendly with Russia. So the media got a hold of this, so I think the whole Trump Tower deal sort of fizzled out and fell apart. But what's more important is in July of 2016, which was just a few weeks after the Trump Tower Moscow deal fell apart, a whole new deal arose, at least according to the Steele dossier, which parts have been corroborated by Carter Page's congressional testimony.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people say, especially those on the right, say that the Steele dossier is a hoax, it's fabricated, but there's nothing that anybody has proven to be not factual. And in fact, there are several instances in the dossier that have been proven to be quite accurate.
So let's continue. So in July of 2016, the Steele dossier alleges that Carter Page flew to Russia for a 3-day trip, and during this trip, he met with Igor Sechin, who was the CEO of Rosneft. Rosneft is a publicly traded oil giant. It's one of the largest in the world, but the majority stake owner is Vladimir Putin and his oligarchs. So he met with Sechin. This is also corroborated by unknown sources who the media has reported on, and congressional testimony by Carter Page. Now, what's not corroborated by anyone other than the Steele dossier so far, at least as far as we know, or the public knows, is the fact that Carter Page and Sechin allegedly had a meeting and in that meeting, they discussed a deal in which Trump would receive the brokerage fees of a 19% sale in Rosneft.
Yeah,
which
Rosneft
would equate to how much?
Yeah, well, Rosneft right now is worth $70 billion, but at the time the deal actually went through, it was $11 billion. So I'm not sure what people get for commission when they sell a business, but in property real estate, you get 5 or 6%. I'm guessing it's probably closer to 2 or 3%, which would be $220 to $330 million.
And it's also worth noting that special counsel said that Trump Organization stood to make hundreds of millions of dollars if the Trump Tower Moscow deal went through. Now, keep in mind, this deal fell apart. Thus, Trump no longer stood to make hundreds of millions of dollars from Russia. And at the same time, if the Trump Moscow deal went through, Russia stood to have a good shot at having Russian sanctions or U.S. sanctions on Russia lifted, because Trump would have been using a Russian sanctioned bank, VTB Bank, in order to finance that deal. So Trump Tower Moscow falls apart. Trump loses those hundreds of millions of dollars. Russia loses its opportunity at trying to convince Trump to lift sanctions if he were to become president. So weeks later, Carter Page, according to the Steele dossier, meets with Sechin, who offers hundreds of millions of dollars to Trump in exchange for lifting sanctions. That was one of the stipulations that Sechin provided to Carter Page, was that Trump would have to lift sanctions if he became president.
Yeah, so then it went on to the Rosneft deal sparked up.
Yes, yeah. So
within weeks of the Trump Tower Moscow deal falling through, in June of 2016, in July of 2016, the Rosneft deal allegedly came about, according to the Steele dossier.
But even if you don't believe the Steele dossier, or if you do, I believe it was right after Trump won the election to become president in December, which was I think it was like a month after he won the election, Rosneft was sold. 19.5% of Rosneft was sold to Qatari Investments.
To a Qatari investment firm, the Qatari Sovereign Investment Fund. And this was run by a man named Al-Ramahi. And Al-Ramahi basically was the head of this fund when they purchased a share of Rosneft. It was the Qatari Investment Fund and a company called Glencore PLC. And these companies both purchased Rosneft together.
And it was funneled through a bunch of shells who were completely anonymous. You can't tell where the money actually went. Is it possible that 19% brokerage fee that Trump was allegedly promised in the Steele dossier actually went to Trump when 19.5% of Rosneft actually sold?
Yeah, so Al-Ramahi, he's another key figure, and it's a very either coincidental or pretty. It's very interesting, the fact that this man Al-Ramahi was at Trump Tower meeting with Michael Flynn and Michael Cohen, and likely Trump. I'm guessing Trump was there. We don't know that. That hasn't been confirmed. This was just 6 days after the Rosneft deal took place. So 6 days after Al-Ramahi purchased a stake in Rosneft, he shows up in Trump Tower with Michael Flynn and Michael Cohen. You might remember in May, Michael Avenatti posted some pictures of a suspicious-looking man, and he said, "Does anybody know who this is?" And it turned out to be Al-Ramahi. So 6 days after the deal went through, he's at Trump Tower. Now, yeah, I mean, this could be a coincidence, but
there's a lot of coincidences here. So okay, if that wasn't weird enough, 6 months later, after the original Rosneft deal went through and 19.5% was sold to Qatar Investments and Glencore, Qatar Investments then sold that stake back to Russia for a loss.
Yeah, and Qatari Investments at the time said that they were betting on the oil prices. They thought oil prices were going to go up and they were going to sell it and make a bunch. But if you check the price of crude oil in those 6 months, it actually went down 10% to from $52 to $46 a barrel. So that argument's kind of out of the window. They sold it for a loss. So well, I don't know if they sold it for a loss, but the oil price was down when they sold it.
So what happened is Trump Tower deal falls through. Trump's no longer getting these hundreds of millions of dollars. Putin no longer has a way of convincing Trump to lift sanctions, at least as far as we know. So immediately after that, weeks after that, Carter Page allegedly flies to Russia, holds a meeting with Igor Sechin, the CEO of Rosneft. Sechin, according to the dossier, proposes a deal to Carter Page in which Trump would get hundreds of millions of dollars as 19% of the brokerage fees of the sale of Rosneft in exchange for lifting sanctions. So then, Rosneft sells 19.5% of the company to Qatar Investments. Qatar Investments, their CEO is actually at Trump Towers days after this, and then Rosneft is sold back from Qatar Investments back to Russia as if nothing ever happened.
Yeah, and to make matters even more suspicious, this Al-Ramahi guy who was in charge of Qatari Investments when they purchased Rosneft, he was involved in another legal dispute here in the United States by a company. He was sued by a company called Big Three Basketball, and in the sworn declaration, one of the founders of Big Three, his name is Jeffrey Quatinetz, he claimed that Aramahi didn't bring forth the funds that he promised, and that Aramahi was instead trying to use his money and influence to gain access to the president and those around the president, and specifically Steve Bannon. Now, you would think that Robert Mueller would be investigating this and he would probably be interviewing Aramahi, but no, he can't do that. You know why? Because Aramahi has diplomatic immunity. He has diplomatic immunity because he is now an ambassador with Qatar, and the United States State Department gave him the diplomatic immunity.
So no, we don't know Trump got this. His money was funneled through these shell companies to Trump. We don't know that. There's no evidence showing that. But it does seem very coincidental, and it seems like it's very possible that that did take place. There's one person who I guarantee knows what took place, and that's Robert Mueller, because Michael Flynn and Michael Cohen are cooperating.
Yeah, and this kind of brings us into the whole Michael Flynn thing. And in January of 2017, Michael Flynn met with Felix Sater, who was an instrumental part of the Trump Tower Moscow deal. He met with this guy, and during the meeting, along with Sater, they also met with a Ukrainian, I guess you'd say he's an opposition leader. And they agreed to a deal with Russia that would allow Russia to lease Ukraine's Crimea for 50 to 100 years in exchange for reduction of sanctions. Now, this proposed deal was brought from Cohen to Michael Flynn, and nothing was ever made out of it. But it kind of brings Cohen into this, and you know that Cohen's talking and telling Mueller.
And we also have to remember that Flynn met with Sergei Kislyak. You remember that, right, Brian? And spoke about Russian sanctions. That he's admitted to that already as part of his plea deal with Robert Mueller. So it kind of links everything together. We don't have evidence that Trump got this money, but it sure seems kind of fishy.
Yeah, and I'm sure they're looking into these shell companies that were set up that the money was transferred to after the sale of Rosneft. Some are in the Cayman Islands, others all over the world. But I'm sure they have access to what's going on here, or at least we hope they do.
Well, and the fact that Michael Cohen and Michael Flynn are both cooperating with Mueller, I think, kind of gives him everything he needs.
Yeah. So that's that story, and like I said, we tweeted about it. You can go. It's a long article.
The article's on HillReporter.com if you want to read it. It's one of the first two articles on the site.
Yeah, just go to our Twitter accounts, which are below right there, and you'll see the article that we tweeted about right before we tweeted about this video. We also want to talk about the Michael Cohen sentencing. Last week, there was two sentencing memos released, one by the Southern District of New York and another by the Special Counsel's Office, both giving their opinion on what Cohen's sentence should be. The Southern District of New York believes that he should face 42 months and a $100,000 fine. The Special Counsel's Office, they basically said that he lied to us, but we think that any sentence should just be deducted from whatever the Southern District of New York recommends. So they're basically saying he cooperated enough where the lie doesn't really matter, and we can let that go.
How long do you think Cohen's going to get when he's sentenced tomorrow? I heard something that I think Michael Avenatti tweeted that Cohen's lawyers are saying that he's only going to get 2 years.
Well, 42 months is what the Southern District of New York recommended, which would be, 3.5 years. And it's very possible that the judge looks at his cooperation and takes it a step down. If I was to guess, I would say he'll probably get a couple years in prison.
Yeah,
and probably a fine. But the guy has money. I don't think $100,000 fine is going to really mean
my guess is 24 to 36 months, somewhere in between that range.
Yeah. And just Michael Cohen's an interesting character. He was an Obama supporter when Obama was running, which most people don't realize. He worked for Michael Dukakis, who was the Democrat running for office against George H.W. Bush in 1988. So he has Democratic roots. So it's interesting that he was working so proudly for Donald Trump.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess we can jump onto the the Time Person of the
Yeah,
Year.
you did a story about this.
Today the Today Show officially announced who the Time Person of the Year was. And instead of one person, it was a group of people. And instead of just one cover, they're going to have 4 different covers. The 4 covers are going to include 4 journalists who were either killed or imprisoned because of their activities. And it includes Jamal Khashoggi, who's the Saudi journalist working for the Washington Post, who was murdered in the Saudi embassy in Turkey, Saudi consulate in Turkey. It includes, sorry, my phone's going off. I should have turned this off. It includes the 5 Capital Gazette journalists who were murdered back in May in that mass shooting. It also includes two journalists who were working for Reuters in Myanmar who were in prison for 7 years for their journalistic activities, and also a woman named Maria Ressa, who was working as a journalist in the Philippines covering the president in a negative way, and she was charged with tax evasion and tax fraud. This is still an ongoing case, but basically I would say this is kind of a shot in the back for Trump and
slap in the
Putin.
face for the administration.
It's just that they're constantly, both Putin and Trump, who oddly were the winners of the last 2 years.
And bin Salman,
and the Saudi crown prince. But both Putin and Trump were the winners of the Time Person of the Year the last 2 years, and this is kind of going the opposite direction. And Trump's constantly complaining about the fake news media being the enemy of the people, and Putin's killing journalists himself.
Well, meanwhile, Trump has a fake Time magazine cover hanging in his office, doesn't he?
Yeah, I'm sure he's not happy about the 4, well, not 4 individuals, multiple individuals that Time selected. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think Time's defending freedom of press, defending the journalists, saying enough is enough. It's a slap in the face to Trump for sort of ignoring this whole Khashoggi thing.
Yeah. So we can open it up to some questions if you guys have any questions.
Yeah, does anybody have any questions about the links between Rosneft and Trump? And I know it's a very confusing story. If anybody has any questions, we'd like to answer them.
Can you investigate how often Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson sleep over at the White House? Yeah, that's funny.
I don't think that's happening.
He might hire one for chief of staff, though. You never know. All right, so we'll wait a minute for some questions. I know it's kind of laggy right now. It's so damn sad that we are even at a point in time like this. It's scary times. It's sad that we are at this point, but I think that things are going to be changing soon. At least we hope. How about the vice president? Is he clear or just stupid?
I don't think we really know what's going on with Mike Pence yet. We haven't heard about him. He was in charge of the transition team, so he could have. I'm sure Mueller knows a lot more than we do. Right now, there's nothing in the public realm that points to him being liable or implicit in any crime.
If Trump is found to have conspired with Russians to undermine the integrity of the election, it's Mike Pence either knew about it or chose to look the other way, or was really ignorant about the whole thing and probably shouldn't be vice president.
Yeah, or maybe he was kept in the dark. Who knows? We don't know that. We can't say one way or the other, but I'm sure we'll eventually find out the answers.
Do you think Trump will escape prosecution? And this is an interesting question. I think that I don't think he's particularly going to be indicted anytime soon, because they're probably not going to try to indict a sitting U.S. president. But if he's impeached or once his term expires in January 2021, I think it's very likely that he's going to be indicted at that point.
Yeah, I mean, the other possibility is he could reach a deal with federal prosecutors to resign in exchange for not being indicted. Don't you think that's a possibility?
Yeah, no, that's definitely possible. That's something that some some legal scholars have been talking about that he could reach a deal where he resigns, and it's something that you could see him doing because I'm sure he doesn't want to go to prison. Others have said that he might resign 15 minutes before he's supposed to leave office, allow Mike Pence to pardon him, and blah, blah, blah. But you got to realize that there's also possible state crimes. Right now, all we know is that he directed his attorney, Michael Cohen, to commit 2 felonies. And that in itself should be a felony under most cases.
But I mean, there's a lot of debate over, okay, other politicians have committed these campaign finance violations in the past. Are they really going to go after him criminally for this? Should they be going after him criminally? What Cohen took part in is a lot different than what Obama took part in, or Obama's campaign took part in several years ago. Obama had to pay back, I forget, $130,000 or $100. I don't know. He basically, his campaign basically didn't report certain campaign finances within a 48-hour period that they were supposed to. That's a far cry from having your attorney commit felonies by paying women not to talk about you because you know that it's going to hurt your chances in an election.
Yeah, no, I agree. Somebody also asked, somebody said I can tolerate Pence for 2 years, no more though. But first, I want to make it clear that a lot of people don't understand the difference between impeachment and being convicted by the Senate after impeachment. Any impeachment and trial is going to take. It's going to be close to taking 2 years, I think. I mean, if Mueller comes forth with clear allegations that Trump conspired with Russians to commit crimes against America, and he's impeached, this probably wouldn't happen until March at the earliest,
Yeah,
probably later than that. And then you have a hearing in the Senate where 2/3 of the Senate needs to convict him, which I don't know if that's actually going to be.
It's going to have to be some hard evidence in order for that to happen, and Trump's going to have to lost a lot of ground within the Republican Party, I think.
So my point is that by the time he is thrown out of office via impeachment and conviction, if that is actually going to happen, it's probably not going to be until probably late 2019, early 2020, with only less than a year, probably less than a year.
It could be interesting to see how that unfolds with the 2020 election coming up. Could the impeachment hearings actually be running as they're campaigning, you know?
Well, and then do Republicans just dump him because they figure, well, we might as well just go with Pence? I mean, this guy has no chance. He's basically going to be convicted and thrown out of office. And it's really going to, I think the timing of it all is going to play into it, because if it's close to the election, then he's going to probably, then it's probably going to be, you have the senators on the right, the Republican senators are probably more likely to kind of vote against Trump.
Well, then there's going to be the Republican senators who are up for re-election in 2020. They're going to decide if they support somebody who's basically been shown to be a criminal, or are they going to go against him and basically say we've had enough with this?
Well, that's key too. I believe there's 22 Republican senators up for re-election in 2020, and there's only 11 Democrats. So Democrats have a pretty good chance of taking the Senate in 2020. And the fact that all these Republicans are going to have their jobs on the line, if things look bad, and if Mueller's report shows that Trump did commit these crimes, it's going to be tough for them to, I think, go against that.
You also have to keep in mind that these senators represent entire states, not just little congressional districts that could be 70% Republican. The states are more equaled out. That there's more Democrats versus Republicans. It's pretty equal in these states.
And somebody who said Lawrence Tribe believes that Trump is going to can be indicted, and I think he can be indicted. I just don't know if Mueller's going to risk trying to indict him and then taking it to the Supreme Court.
All right, well, you say this, but what about the Southern District of New York? They could indict him. Mueller. People say Mueller probably won't indict him just because of the way he is and his respect for just the way the DOJ works. But the Southern District of New York still could try to indict him.
Yeah, and then basically what would happen there is they probably appeal it. It will go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court's going to have to decide, can a sitting president be indicted? Right now, DOJ, the Department of Justice, has kind of a policy of not indicting any sitting president, but that doesn't mean it's a law. That's just their policy.
if it does get to the Supreme Court, that's going to set a precedent for all future presidents. And so, what happens if a president murders somebody? If there's a precedent already set that you can't be indicted sitting president, that means that future president could murder somebody and get away with it.
Yeah, and I think the Supreme Court would look at all that and kind of look at what did the Constitution really want to express. What would our forefathers say?
Yeah, and without a doubt, if a president commits a crime, I'm sure our forefathers would likely have wanted him to be charged with a crime. You can't just be a criminal running the country.
Yeah, no, I agree there too. What's the latest with Maria Butina? For those who don't know, Maria Butina is I don't want to say spy, but she was working for the Russians. She was
basically a
she
spy.
was transferring information to a guy named Alexander Torshin. She was working with the NRA, kind of as a back channel between the NRA, Russia, and the GOP. At least this is what's alleged right now. And she just pled guilty, or she's about to plead guilty. I don't know if the filing actually went through.
Yeah,
but
pretty much a given that she's pleading.
But now she's pleading guilty. She's probably going to be working with Robert Mueller. We don't know if it was a cooperation agreement or not, but one would assume.
I believe it was. I believe she was fully cooperating.
So that kind of drags the NRA into things and drags the GOP and some of the fundraisers in the GOP into things, I think.
All right, so is that all? Or we have
I guess we can wrap things up unless you guys have any other questions. Butina's has dirt on all kinds of congressmen. We don't know that. We know that she probably has dirt on some of the GOP operatives, including the one that she was
perhaps
having
some
an affair
people
with.
within the NRA. Again, we don't know for sure, but it's a possibility.
And yes, along with Michael Cohen's sentencing, Butina's hearing is tomorrow as well. And I think there's also a hearing.
Today at 3 p.m., I believe, a judge is going to decide if Paul Manafort has broke his plea agreement with Robert Mueller. That should be interesting. My guess is that the courts are going to say that he did. I think there's a filing where Manafort didn't even want to show up for the hearing. He's trying to get out of having to show up.
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot going on in the next couple of days. I think the next few days we're gonna see a lot more is gonna be uncovered in this.
Yeah, me too.
I don't know if it's gonna be as bombshellish as last week, but I think there's a lot coming in the next 3 days.
Yep. All right, so I guess we'll wrap this up.
We'll wrap this up. Watching. If you haven't checked the article out about Trump Tower Moscow and the Rosneft deal, check that out. We'll try to do another one of these probably at the end of the week or maybe next week. Thanks again.